Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Thornburg, and I wanted to review measles because we're having more and more cases happen around the country. I wanted to look at the number of cases that have happened over the last couple of years, also look at the complication rate with hospitalizations, deaths, and other complications that are identified by the CDC. I also want to take a look at the historical context of measles, what the disease burden has been over time, how the vaccine changed the disease burden, and last, what you can do to help protect your family against complications from measles. So this year in 2026 through January 13th, there have been 145 cases of measles with 2 hospitalizations and 0 deaths. Last year in 2025, there were 1,558 cases of measles with 164 hospitalizations and 2 deaths. These deaths, whenever you hear that, very alarming. No parent wants to hear that their child might contract a disease that can result in death. Whenever you hear something that's aberrant, you always want to understand the details of what surrounds that case or these cases. The reason I'm highlighting this as aberrant is that there has not been a measles death in the United States since 2003 until 2025. So that is 22 years without a measles death. That's why it's aberrant. So looking at these 2 deaths from last year, they have unique circumstances. Therefore, they are not applicable to the general pediatric population. We can't just say 2 kids died, all of a sudden every kid in the United States might die. That is not what the facts tell us. One of these cases was an iatrogenic death. That means it was physician caused. The child went to the hospital, received the wrong medicine, and passed away. If the right medicine had been selected, chances are the child would be here today. So this was not directly resulting from the measles. The other case involved a child that was part of a very conservative religious sect, and they do not actively engage with medical care. It's part of their culture. So by the time the child got to the hospital, too much time had passed. So the reason this child passed away was failure to seek timely medical attention because of that community's standards. So these 2 pediatric deaths are not applicable to the general population. Now, over the last year, we did see more cases of measles across the country than we have seen for more than 20 years. That is fact. However, just cases of measles by itself does not mean a bad outcome. You can look, I'm just going to go kind of more populist here. There was an episode of the Brady Bunch in the 70s where one of the children developed measles. In the whole episode, one of the most popular TV shows, one of the most mainstream TV shows, one of the kids developed measles. Eventually, everybody in the house developed measles, and it was a measles party, and everybody was happy and smiling, and there were no complications. The Brady Bunch certainly would not have highlighted a very deadly disease and made light of it, given the time period it was in, the 1970s, and also it was really representing how the society looked at measles at the time as being kind of just a rite of passage of childhood. So it's important that we put things into historical context. With that said, let's take a look at measles over time. Measles became a reportable disease in 1912. From 1912 through 1922, there were 6,000 measles deaths per year. The population at that time was roughly about 95 to 100 million people. 6,000 deaths per year, 1912 to 1922. The next time they did an analysis of the frequency of death with measles was from 1953 until 1963. Every year during that 10-year period, 400 to 500 people passed away per year. The population at that time was approximately 190 million people, almost 100% more in the U.S. population compared to 1922. What that means is when we see 6,000 deaths against a population of approximately 100 million people, against an incidence of death of 400 to 500 in a population of almost 200 million people, you could see that the disease burden is even lower. And if we were to make common denominators between 1922 and 1963, so we can compare apples to apples in terms of population, then we can see that there were approximately 6,000 deaths per year in 1922 and 200 to 250 deaths per year in 1963. Mind you, this is all before the vaccine was introduced. The vaccine was introduced in 1963. The majority of the decrease in cases did not result from the introduction of the vaccine. Instead, the decreased disease burden resulted from improved societal infrastructure. Between 1912 and 1963, there was improvement to sanitation, water supply, nutrition, access to medical care, roads, cars, education. Across every metric that you could possibly evaluate the societal infrastructure, there was an improvement. And that is the true result of the disease burden. It was not because of the vaccine. So let's look at the vaccine. Introduced in 1963, the vaccine has definitely decreased the number of cases of measles, but the vaccine has not changed. I want to emphasize this, has not changed the complication incidence. Per 1,000 cases, the same complications occur at the same rate. And what are these complications? Ear infections, diarrhea, pneumonia, panacute sclerosing panencephalitis, and death. The number of deaths, the number of every complication I just listed is the same pre and post vaccine per 1,000 cases. The vaccine has not changed the complication rate. What that means is by taking the vaccine, there's less chance that you will have measles, but if you get measles, it doesn't matter if you've had the vaccine or you haven't had the vaccine. So that needs to be very clear. Now, a lot of these complications from measles are very common in children anyways. Ear infections, the number one reason kids come in. Well, maybe colds are the number one reason, but ear infections are certainly in the top 2 or 3. Diarrhea, also in the top 5 of reasons children come in to see the doctor. Pneumonia wouldn't be in the top 3 to 5, but certainly in the top 10 of reasons children come in to see the doctor. Because these are so common in the pediatric population, there is some overcounting when they look at these complications, because not all ear infections, diarrhea, and pneumonia occur because the child has had the measles. Sometimes those diseases happen independent and the child had the measles. So there is a little overstating of the complication rate for those 3 issues. So what is the incidence of each of those complications per 1,000 cases? 60 cases of ear infections, 60 cases of diarrhea, 10 to 60 cases of pneumonia, 0.04 to 0.2 cases of panacute sclerosing panencephalitis, and 0.1 to 3 cases of death. How can you protect your family given all of this information? We are seeing a rise in the number of cases. What we focus on is what decreased the disease burden prior to the introduction of the vaccine. We have to focus on nutrition. If your child is eating a lot of sugary foods, is eating a lot of foods that contain seed oils, is overeating, is becoming obese, is developing diabetes, metabolic disease, then your child is at increased chance for a complication. The risk factors for having complications are a child under 5 years old, an adult over 30 years old, malnutrition, and immunocompromised. So paying attention to those risk factors, introduce that into your decision making on whether or not the vaccine is important, or if you can focus on what the historical cause of the decrease in disease burden has been. And I highlight that just because nutrition is so bad among children, given the popularity of junk food, fast food, foods containing seed oils. There's so many calories, extra calories put into our food purposely by the food companies. And all of that is moving children more and more into those risk factors. So the last place we want to be is looking at having to give a vaccine just because we're not feeding our child correctly. Also, we have to pay attention to what our child's nutritional status is beyond the calorie count, because food does not contain the same nutrients that it has historically. Soil has been depleted of nutrients, so it's super important that everybody, every child, every adult take a multivitamin, because we need to make sure that we have the vitamin A on a daily basis, that we have all the calcium, vitamin D, all the other micronutrients and vitamins that are essential to proper body function, enzyme function, metabolic processes, detoxification pathways. Because without the addition of a good multivitamin, then moving towards that risk factor group, again, just because our government agencies, our medical regulatory bodies have not policed our nutrition, have not held the government accountable to allowing these food companies to make it more profitable for them by their slowly introducing more and more cheaper foods, grains, corns, rather than focusing on healthy nutrition. That's another discussion on the upside down food pyramid compared to the historical food pyramid. But if you hear my messaging, you know this is important. If your child does develop measles, it's hugely important that they take high dose vitamin A. Everybody can take high dose vitamin A. The dosing depends how old you are. So make sure that you look up vitamin A dosing. I'm not going to give it here because you're not going to remember, and you want to look at it anyways, because before you give the medicine, even for me who writes medicines all the time, I'll still double check all my numbers before I administer medicine. Just make sure that you follow the age appropriate high dose vitamin A dosing. Hopefully this helps you understand how to take appropriate steps to keep your child healthy overall, but also specifically here with the measles. Thanks a lot for watching.